All right, it is Thursday, August 9th, 2007. I'm George Jardine. I'm here in the home and studio of Pete Turner in Wainscott, New York, with Pete looking at some of his fabulous photographs. Thank you, Pete, for agreeing to sit down and join me in this little podcast.
My pleasure, George.
Really, really love your photographs. You've been an inspiration for me for longer than I want to admit on this podcast. Your photography's always stood out as being iconic for me, and we've got a really beautiful selection of some of your photos here we're going to look at and talk about today. You got your start on a project in Africa. Do you want to talk a little bit about that first project?
Oh, I'd love to. It was really a great break because I had just gotten out of the Army and living in barracks with like 50, 80 people, double bunk beds and everything. And people approached me and said, would I be willing to go to Africa for 6 to 7 months and document a caravan of 43 trailers driving from Cape Town, South Africa, to Cairo, Egypt? And I said right away, well, you bet. I'd be glad to do that. And they said, you realize you have to drive in a little box because you wouldn't actually have an Airstream trailer. You'd have to drive in actually one of the first prototype RV vehicles ever made. And I said, yeah, that'd be great. And I actually loaded my vehicle on the dock in Brooklyn and flew for 43 hours in props to Europe and then to Rome and then down through Kano, Nigeria, and then down to the Congo. It was like those dotted lines that you see that went to forever, and then Johannesburg, and finally Cape Town, and there was my vehicle.
It made it.
It made it. It made it in one piece, and all I can say is I had the freedom to go anywhere I wanted to. I could drive away from the group, photograph things I really liked, experience incredible weather and roads, and it was pre-independent Africa. It was the Africa before. It was, in a sense, easier to cross borders and things, and yet complicated because we'd have to be met by fueling trucks. Huge tankers would meet us at certain points or borders or whatever, because these things gulp fuel and you couldn't drive up to a gas station. Difficult thing.
So this was in Cape Town, this photograph? We
started in Cape Town, right. And this jumps around a bit. This is actually one of the roads in Ethiopia, and I'm actually pulling a fellow's trailer, a golden trailer, which was Wally Byam's gift to Haile Selassie in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Wow.
But then that's a whole other story. And dust was unbelievable. I mean, we'd have mud, we'd have dust, we'd have all sorts of things.
Did you take all your film with you? Or?
Yes, I had it wrapped around a 300-gallon water tank, which kept the temperatures pretty good. And the vehicle had a range of something like 900 miles, which is amazing. And you can find gas stations like this in South Africa.
Wow.
Which is like, I think every filmmaker's dream is to find a simple old-fashioned, gas station. But this was it. And back then in Kenya, when you crossed into the Northern Frontier District, I came across like this wonderful Arab arch. And I knew that we were making a transition from the Bantu African part of Africa into the Muslim Arabic part, and photographed this picture. I thought it was very symbolic. And then many years later, on the computer, I'm enlarging it for a book that I did called Pete Turner African Journey. And I couldn't believe my eyes when I enlarged it. There were all these bullet holes along the side, like blow up. I think one of the wonderful things that stays with me in my first trip is the unbelievable spectacles of places like Victoria Falls at dawn with great color, and or the wonderful sand dunes of the Saucy Bay. And it's a land of incredible contrast, a land of incredible architecture. like Dar el-Bahari in Egypt. And I think when we got through the whole trip, I think one of course, the highlights was to get to the Great Pyramid, and we were able to wagon wheel in front of it. And I can remember laying on top of my vehicle at night, looking up at the stars, looking up at the shape of the pyramid, and they're so bright out there in the desert, and saying, God, how am I ever going to top this experience? I'm a kid just out of the Army and had shot about 300 rolls of color film, and it was a speculative job where National Geographic had kind of tutored me to shoot film and send it back to me, so I was getting processing results and whatnot. Very, very amazing for the time. And because with film cameras, you couldn't tell if you had dust or this. You had to have checks made, and there was no place to do that. And
But as you were going, did you feel as if you were getting the shots you needed for the story?
oh yeah, yeah. The story was really self-evolving, and it was really anything I wanted to photograph. And of course, shooting these incredible aluminum machines and the way people would look at them driving through Africa was unbelievable. I mean, it was like we were like from outer space. I mean, they just looked at us like
I
couldn't believe it. I must
It's
say,
a fabulous shot.
This is a bar in Ethiopia, and I love the confidence this fellow has and exudes. And I think we had a wonderful feeling of having achieved really something quite unique, of being able to do what we did. And for me, it was an incredible learning experience, because I was also a graduate of Rochester Institute of Technology, 4 years in their photographic department, the first group to photograph for 4 years with a bachelor's degree. Up to that was only 2, AAS degree, and that was it. So we were quite fortunate. Wonderful teachers, Ralph Hattersley and Minor White and Bob Bagby, and great people. Anyway, rolling ball. I've been into geometry all my life, and rolling ball was a real interesting exercise for me, because I realized it was really a hut, a station hut, where they kept equipment below, but the top was conical, and there was another cone on top of that, and it was the only picture you could conceivably make out in the middle of nowhere. And I said, well, it was like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. I said, well, I'll come back there at sunset and I'll shoot. And I knew it was like 1:05, but I walked around and I realized that as I'm walking around, the ball of the sun, I could make the ball of the sun. I could move it up or down. I could actually put it on the top, put it on the other side. So I could make pictures of this hut top, hut roof. I could make them and create my own interpretation of it. Rather, it was not reportage in a sense. It was building pictures or making pictures. And up to that point, I was always thinking of taking pictures. And then the light bulb went off, and I said, you can make pictures. You can do more. I kind of knew that instinctively, but this image really
Brought it home for you?
Brought it home for me. It was a wonderful learning curve, a good one.
Oh, I can see that.
Now, I went back to Africa quite a few times, and the giraffe was really an image that was overexposed totally. I was in Africa for Esso at the time, and they wanted me to symbolize their company in Africa, and I said, why not take out a tanker? Because I'd remembered them from my first trip following us, and I said, we'll run them, along the salt flats and maybe try to herd up a giraffe or something to run alongside to symbolize Africa. Well, we never really did get the giraffes, but we got wildebeest and we got zebras alongside, definitely symbolized Africa. Also, they could hear that thing for about 100 miles, and I had every sort of person saying, you can't do that, you can't do that. But we made our picture. Everything was finished. The tanker went away, and I have a couple of Land Rovers, walkie-talkies, and I could see a couple of giraffe, and I wanted to make some pictures for myself. I didn't go all the way to Africa. I always liked to make pictures for myself. So I photographed this series on giraffes. And of course, when I get home, a few weeks later, the very best action of the giraffe with the legs just perfectly positioned was overexposed. And it was overexposed like about 2 stops. And in the old days, you couldn't bring back those exposures. And I'm pulling
No highlight recovery.
Pardon?
No highlight.
Oh my God. And I'm saying, I gotta figure out something. And so I had reached a stage where I hated to send my originals out to people. So I reprenarded them all. And I had a fancy reprenard that I built. Marty Forsher in New York helped me. And we put a Nikon close-up lens on it with a Nikon body and put a real strobe underneath it. In other words, it was a really souped-up professional stage. And I could slide filters underneath, and I could also attach them to a chrome. And I said, well, if you were to put a Raton 21 gold filter on top and a magenta 32 filter taped to the bottom, I forget how that all works, but it comes together and you end up with a red top and a magenta bottom. Mm-hmm. And I was able to do that right on the horizon line. And later on, digitally, we were able to get rid of any artifacts that might have ended up in the middle. But it's become definitely a signature piece. And what happened then is I was able to bring the density back down to where it pleased me. And I was also able to create something color-wise that was totally off the wall. And it was published, picked up right away, and it was exhibited at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. When you went up the steps, it was hung huge as part of Photography in the Fine Arts exhibit. I think that was 1967 or 65, I forget. But anyway, it was a big thing because people weren't doing filters like this with color. They were afraid to do anything with color. If they put a skylight filter over the front of a lens, that would be an enormous color change, and a polarizer maybe to darken the sky.
That's a fabulous image.
So in making duplicates, I came around to being able to change the colors and whatnot. And I don't know if I articulated at all why I got into duplicates, but I got into that because you'd hand out originals. They'd come back from the engravers with absolutely looked like people spilled lunches and did dances over the chromes. They were destroying them. And I realized I just had to come up with a technique. And my technique really was that I would increase the saturation of the color by rephotographing the chrome, not with duping film, but with Kodachrome. So I'd be going Kodachrome to Kodachrome, which would give me an instant increase in the total, contrast of things. And then using filters and drawers. It's like you in saturation. I basically had a mini Photoshop going for myself, a very mechanical Photoshop, a very primitive one. But nobody else was doing stuff like that. And I just fell into it because I didn't want to send out my original work. And as an offshoot of that, I was able to move into really far out colors like the giraffe. And in 1970 in Nambuselli, very near where I did the giraffe, I found this cheetah in the bamboo stalking along, and I kept shooting. And I'm shooting like a thousandth of a second or whatever it is to stop the action. All of a sudden, I had like a roll already. I put another roll, and I said, this is ridiculous. What happens if you start cranking down the speed so you can get some motion in there and, do some good stuff? And I shot at all different shutter speeds, and it went on and on. This cat is just going right through bamboo. It was the most wonderful, right next to the road. He stayed exact distance to me, and we just shot endless frames, and I forgot about it. I get back to New York and process the material, and it was unbelievable. It was thrilling, but it had to go through second generation and get enhanced and colorized and do those things.
It's a nice use of the contrast and the saturation.
I love surreal things, just like a giraffe. And with these ostriches, I wanted to create a very surreal image. And I knew the necks. It's called necking. I knew the necks just had to, be there. And there were people called ostrich herders at this farm, and they herded them so that I could use a 300 millimeter and actually get them right behind the sun. And we did that, and I was very happy. With the exception, I had one little problem back in 1970. One of the ostriches was looking away from the camera. And I believe it's the second guy here. He was looking away and he had no beak. Thanks to the wonders of digital photography, he now has a beak.
Perfect.
And that's a real good use of cloning, I got to tell you. It was fun to do. Mozambique, I'm driving along and I see these different women and they're coming back and forth to market. And we hit the brakes. It's real interesting because their faces are all painted white. And they're wonderfully friendly people. We photographed them. And I asked them, I said, well, what is that tribal makeup they have on? They said, oh, no, that's not tribal makeup. That's their morning cream so they don't get acne and stuff. So I made a really interesting series. And the people are so wonderful. On Mozambique Island. And there was, I believe, a war going on very nearby. And yet these people went about their way, and they love color.
Wow.
This is a little series I did in Namanga, Kenya. It's a couple hours south of Nairobi. They have a very special thing about their earlobes, and they pierce them. And in olden times, they used to put rocks in them to stretch them out, and then they put adornments in them. But these days, they didn't like the weight of rocks, so they'd put like the guy walking by with a film can in his ear, or this guy with a cigar can earring. And I thought that was pretty classy. And then like a more traditional fellow would come along and he'd just have a piece of copper earring. And this is a rather classic image of mine.
Mm-hmm.
It's called electric earring, Maasai profile. And I was going to wrap it up after this picture because I felt it was almost like, you know, the early American Curtis work and whatnot. I mean, it was just so perfectly Kenya and Maasai that I was literally getting ready to throw things in the case. And this man walks up and he's got this pineapple can in his ear.
Wow.
And it's the biggest can I ever saw, and he's very proud of it. He posed for me. I was just thrilled. And when he walked away, and I compensate each of them, like I give them a Polaroid and I give them a shilling or whatever, because I believe you should do that. And everybody's very happy. You know, when he walked away, I said, okay. Said to my assistant, I said, that's it. It's a wrap. We're leaving, and we got it. And that was great. And after a while, about, I think in 95 or so, I decided, gee, you know, I have to put these things together. And then a few years ago, came out with a book called Pete Turner, African Journey. And it has this color, you know, this foot with wonderful rings around it of all different colors and textures. And actually, they're telephone copper wires. And yes, and the people are noted for ripping down their communications and electricity to get at the colors.
Wow.
But
that'll teach them to put colored wires out there.
Yeah, I don't think they're color coding the wires in that area anymore. But that was the title of Pete Turner. That's on the cover of Pete Turner, African Journey.
So here we are in Iceland.
Well, not quite yet. I'm in New York. I'm reading the New York Times. It's in the morning. I see this little couple column wide picture of a volcano, but it was erupting in the middle of a town. And I said, that's really different. And I called up my editor friend, Harold Hayes at Esquire, and I said, Harold, take a look at the New York Times. And he looked at it, and I said, I want to go there. I want to fly tonight. I said, I want to be there. And he said, but Pete, he says, you know, I got to get okays and everything. I said, there's no time, Harold. I said, you got to do it, and I want you to call ahead for me and get a writer or somebody to meet me and, you know, get it together. And I said, can you please, you know, try to do it? He says, well, give me an hour or two. Let me see what I can do. He says, I think it's a good idea. I think we should do it. So I start packing my stuff and getting my gear ready. And sure enough, the phone rings, and he says, you got it.
Wow.
And it was a 5 o'clock flight, or I had to leave at 5. I remember 5 o'clock and get to Kennedy, and flew over there, was flown to the island, and it was absolutely awesome. It was like a Japanese Godzilla thing. I mean, I was transported into something. I mean, the sound of the eruption was like, I can't make the sound, but it was like 100 locomotives going back and forth, spewing. And this particular picture, people think is a special effect, but it's not. It's about a 30 or 40-second time exposure at dawn. And that thing would go that direction, and then it would fume up and then start spitting off to the right. And we'd be hit with things and whatnot. I was with a group of people with hard hats and whatnot, scientists, and we tried to get catnap at night, and the sound of these rocks hitting they had corrugated stuff on top. It was amazing. And they were afraid the island might blow. I mean, nobody knew what this was. It's very near the old Sturtsey location. Sturtsey is like 20 or 30 miles away, and that's where the creation was done and all that stuff. It's unbelievable. Anyway, I have this series, and I went back. Basically, it's present day, so if you look at the volcano then, and then you look at it at present day, you can see that not much is going on in this particular shot, but
the town wasn't completely destroyed.
The town was rebuilt in the same way. It's very interesting. Like this little house, you can see the volcano going off in the background, like a curved window. And when I went back,
wow!
Lo and behold, there's green grass. Everything is being painted. Slowly but surely, they're fixing things up.
And so this was shot just recently,
right? Like I think in the late '90s, and the whole town was inundated with ash and tuffra, which is like glass when you walk on it. I remember I had to, for some reason, got too much in my shoe, and I'd peel off my sock, and it would cut the soles of your feet. You just couldn't get into it. It's bad stuff. And but going back, bingo.
Wow.
It's an amazing transition. It's like a time machine when you go back and forth and you see these
same buildings. Yeah.
And we've done this in a way that they actually are registered, so it's really kind of neat on a big screen.
That's a great comparison. And where were the originals published? In Esquire?
In Esquire. And the outtakes have never really been published when I went back.
Oh, I thought Esquire would want to pick those up and republish them.
Well, there's a whole different teams of editors and things. Magazines change. It's different. And so, my career has expanded, over many, many years. And I've always been experimenting. Even when I was in the Army, I was taking pictures because I was stationed in Long Island City. It's a tough tour of duty running a color lab. And this is in 1956 to 58. So this is photographed in 1957, and since I'm running a color lab, I'd have weekends off, and I could go into the city and shoot things and experiment. And I love to play around with motion and focus. I thought that was great, and color. I was running a Type C color lab, and Type C had very new, but the Army was the first to get this stuff from Rochester. And Type C was a dream come true for a guy like me because I could play with the color again. And maybe that's the reason I got into not having a problem rephotographing my work on Kodachrome and increasing contrast and things, because I was used to the whole darkroom scene. It's at Times Square in the middle of a snowstorm. Again,
I love this shot.
Very simple. It's just fun to shoot after a big snowstorm. Of course, no people. I like that.
No footprints either.
No footprints.
Oh, this is a classic.
Well, I had an assignment, actually, to do a cover called Soul Flutes for Creed Taylor. He said, what would you like to do? And I said, why don't we do lips? Why don't we do lips? He said, well, that'll be great. And I said, but I'm fed up of looking at lips as they appear in Vogue and Bazaar. And I said, they look so perfect, and I've done a lot of beauty ads too, and it's like the search for perfection keeps going on and on. And I said, why don't we just paint them a raw red? Let's get a makeup artist with real paint and paint the lips red. And I said, that should really be a very good that should be a good drawing card for people to get interested in the album. So we did it, and it worked out.
Yeah, that really pops.
We were doing an album, Day in the Life, with Wes Montgomery. And I had taken this photograph in the morning after waking up with a friend that didn't seem to be working out too well. And there were all these cigarette butts in the ashtray. And I said, gee, this kind of sums up the way I feel about this relationship. And I photographed it. And then later on, when we were trying to figure out what to use for A Day in the Life, I said, I got the exact picture. And everybody agreed that this was the route to go.
Wow.
So I think the only lesson here is that we can all strive for beauty in our photography or whatever, but there's a certain amount of interest in beauty in the ugly too. I think photography is wonderful in the way it goes back and forth and the sort of things you can shoot. And lately, I've been very interested in just shooting things where I live. And you don't have to go halfway around the world to some exotic place just to make a picture. I think, like, I'm interested in triangles and shapes and things, and I'm finding them in shadows and angles and things, and it's really very interesting. And
well, you've done some very interesting recent work in Mexico with those colored shapes.
Well, that's true. Maybe we can get into that a little later. Again, this was back in, I think, 1961. This is Night Train. And it's part of a series I did on the railroads of America. Again, I presented it to Esquire, and I said, well, what happens if I get on a train at Grand Central, and I go around the country, go over to Portland, go down the West Coast, go across Texas, New Orleans, and then work my way back up. I can get out at Penn Station. They kind of liked that idea, so they called it Pavon for the Iron Horse. And I'd ride it for a while, get off at a place, shoot the tracks, shoot the trains, shoot from the train, shoot the trains going by. It was a dream come true, because I always loved trains since I was a kid. And this is one of the pictures that came out of it. And the beauty of digital work, of course, is we're able to, like, photographically, the screen was very lost, and we were able to bring it back, and the red stripe was weak, and I were able to pull it back. And a lot of my work has been worked on. Boat wake is a classic example. Many people don't know what they're looking at. They say, what are those balloons?
Yeah, it is. It's very abstract.
But boat wake, I was photographing in the fjords in Scandinavia, Norway, and they're very interesting. Fjords are built with great high walls around them, so that basically you have gobos all around you, high things that shade the light. So if a boat is making a reflection, it's going putt, 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 putt. Well, you can see those putt, 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 putt things going on in the water. And I didn't realize it at the time. I was shooting usually from the side of the boat, and then I looked to the back. I couldn't believe my eyes. There was an actual visual rendition of the sound of the boat on the water that was perfect. And I photographed it immediately, and then really, it's a wonder I had just the right lens and everything. It didn't last for long because we had that nice turn. I mean, if it was going straight, I suppose that would be an interesting picture. But I think the very fact that you have this nice curving into, and definitely it was not a hired boat, so it was a one-shot deal. And
it just comes together in a great composition.
It really worked out well for me, and the blue color is great. And what you're looking at is the sky directly above, reflecting in the water, which is not waves. So
nice.
I'm setting up in India, and I see these dyers, and they have these wonderful hands that are all different colors. And there's this fellow that had really red hands, and I said, boy, that'd make great shots. So I went over to him and asked him to hold his hands for me, and I have everything set up. It takes a while. Back then, I think this is in the 60s, and just getting ready to shoot, and this fly lands, and I shot real quick. And that thing is sharp as a tack. I've blown that up 300%, and those flies are like, the wings of the fly is just sharp as a tack. But it's great when you set out to do one thing, and then that accident happens and you get something a little bit more. Like a fly
Serendipity.
just lands.
Yeah.
And I'd kid people. I said, well, I had a pet fly. But old age. I was in Sweden. I was working on a movie. I think it was The Seagull. And again, every time when I work on jobs and things, I just sometimes just have to get away. You know, especially if you're doing something that's intense and you just want to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to go out and shoot for fun. And this is one of those things where I hid behind the shadow of the tree, saw this wonderful couple. And I title it Old Age. You know, I like the way the shadow works.
Mm-hmm.
And the wonderful greens, you know, up in the stripe, just a touch of blue, just the right amount of color.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's a very special picture. And I like to title the pictures as I get to know them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in Ibiza, on the island, on the Balearic Islands off Spain, and doing a little essay on that town, and all whitewashed, beautiful and whatnot. And I had this interesting angle, but the street was empty, and it could have been a picture without a person, but I had seen people walking across the street, specifically just right this way, you know, from
Mm-hmm.
left to right, and people, how they wear different things and whatnot, a guy, this, that. But I'd seen a woman prior in a long black shawl, and I said, oh, it'd be so good if I could get, you know, another person dressed similarly. And sure enough, one came along, and I'm watching, and I can't almost believe my luck, because I could tell about 5 beats ahead that I was sure she'd put her foot on the curb. And I was ready, and I'd been ready for quite a while, and she came down, she hit that curb, and I hit that button, and I got it. And I knew right then, I didn't need to see film or anything. I had that, and it was just such a great feeling. And it's called Ibiza Woman.
Great texture. Good moment.
Thank you. And a similar thing happens at Vaux-Vicomte, which is a wonderful castle that Lenotte built, designed in France. And they have wonderful gardens and whatnot, and I love the yews, the way they're geometrically shaped and everything. And I had a pretty good picture going, and this guy walked like out from behind this yew and somehow did a little twist with his coat, and I got this shape, and I knew, you know, right away, again, that was like the time to make the picture. And it was an overcast day, and I was using an 85B filter to warm it up a little bit, and you can make out like some of it. If you know the terrain,
Mm-hmm.
you can slowly start
Mm-hmm.
to make it out. The prints of these are I find them much more interesting to look at prints, because they're more, you know, you can see a lot more sometimes.
Interesting.
Well, geometry has always fascinated me, and I think as a kid I loved the World's Fair symbol, the Trilon and
Mm-hmm.
photosphere.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, you know, the 39 World's Fair, I think I was about 5 years old or something, but I remember going through books and seeing pictures of it, and I've always been inspired by geometric shapes, by triangles and by round things like rolling ball, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the sun in the desert. And so I've always shot things like that. And one interesting image is Future City, which is in the permanent collection at LACMA. And Robert Sobiesak collected that, and actually was in his book, The Art of Persuasion, because it was photographed for Bell Atlantic, and the art of persuasion is the art of advertising. And it was really interesting. We had models made, what looks like a little city. Those things are actually 4 feet high, maybe, you know, 4, 4, 4, 4. It's quite a big set.
Yeah,
And
and
then-
that scale is very difficult to imagine.
I know, and they're all pixelated, and we lit them underneath and everything. And then this guy is really a 4x8 set. It's lucite plexiglass with all those shapes cut. These shapes you're looking at are all cut to fit. And we put them together, the whole team at the studio. It was a big job. And then, of course, we put it on, gave it English, so it has a little spacey feel to it, and then flipped it over on the top to, give it. But in a sense, well, people have called me the pre-computer photographer. I mean, it's like, I've done a lot of things before the computer, and, that's sort of like, it's fun.
It's a nice shot. And did we double expose the moon, the Earth in there, huh?
That's the moon.
Uh-huh.
And, I'm not big for huge moons, or I know some people like to put gigantic things in them, but I think less is better than more. More realistic, and I felt also it gave better scale to the city. And I just didn't want a total full moon,
Right. Well, you do get a spherical element there, and that's nice.
It's fun. I had done a whole series in Portugal for TAP, the airlines. And one of the places we saw, and we bought a whole bunch of these cases. They're all different colors and whatnot. And working for the airlines, I could bring them out to the airport, and they'd pack them in the fly them back to the States. And anyway, I hung out there for a little bit, and the first thing I wanted to do is get a reflection from the top of a car or something, so it didn't just end in a curb along the street. I think maybe they'd spilled stuff and whatnot, so I used the top of the car just to sort of pick up a little reflection. Then going back in, photographed a wonderful series of these people working and whatnot, and that could have been the picture. And it would have been good. Nothing wrong with it. But after I got back and I looked at this and I saw that black doorway, I said, somehow that black doorway needed something. And so this is titled Doorway in the Sphere. It's actually a billiard ball.
Oh, yeah.
And I tried a red one, and I tried yellow, but this guy worked out just right.
Yeah, it's nice.
And I like to defy gravity whenever I can. I think defying gravity is a lot of fun. This was done for a company called Univac.
Oh, yeah.
But the picture that was done for Univac was this inside image. And we created it by reflecting 3 rows of geometric shapes and then using black Carrara glass as a mirror to reflect them in it. And that duplicates the number. And I'm being very influenced by Tanguy when I did this. And it was really an assignment that said, Pete, do anything that you want to that can somehow symbolize numbers and computer talk, that sort of thing. So it lend itself to, all these sorts of, well, let's put together a lot of geometric shapes and whatnot. I said, great, let's do it. And they were quite happy. And here I am with these wonderful shapes, but without a real home. And in 1969 on Fire Island, I brought a small sampling of those shapes, a sphere and a triangle shape and a cylinder shape and a square. And I brought out a piece of wood and some black velvet and put them out so that I could shoot them against the sky. And I got lucky. It was a great day. I had some clouds go by, and I got different cloud compositions, and I was pretty sure I was working for a picture which I was going to call The Shapes of Things to Come, but I knew that if I worked it over, repeated it, reflected it, and then slid in this other element, it would become more, and that the combination of everything becomes greater as a whole than each picture as an individual. Another thing that really turns me on is reflections. I love reflections. And I was photographing the Victoria Falls, which I think we showed earlier, and I was with a friend and with Harold Hayes, and Harold said, "What you doing, Pete?" Because they handed out these umbrellas to people because the mist would blow over from everybody and everybody get wet from the falls. He said, "What you doing under that umbrella?" And I said, "Well, I'm photographing this reflection." He says, "Are you crazy? You're in front of one of the wonders of the world. Why aren't you shooting that?" I said, "Harold, this is really interesting. Look." And it was totally, a spectromatic umbrella. And I'm more interested in the reflective poles. And it's interesting today, I notice, like with umbrellas and beaches and things, they're all white plastic,
Yeah.
but back then they were still metallic.
Interesting shot.
We had an assignment from IBM. It was about bubble technology. And actually, Will Hopkins was the art director on that. And they wanted me to photograph bubbles because there was some sort of way that bubbles could interconnect to become sort of the magic things like chips are and stuff. I don't know if it ever worked out, but we got crazy about bubbles. And we were trying to photograph bubbles against no seam and whatnot is an interesting problem to solve. And they're very transparent. And they're very kind of bland, to put it simply, very bland. And after shooting a while, I said, this is never going to work. So I went back to the drawing board, and I had the guys, we tried to figure out ways to reflect in different things just as a test. I said, well, hold up some gels and let's see what goes on. And we had plexiglass behind the gels and then a light. And sure enough, the bubble acted like a Christmas tree ball, which is kind of what I was hoping. So we built a light box, top and bottom, of rows of colored gels and laid out the colored gels spectromatically, just as like the colors of the spectrum. So it'd be like green, yellow, red, blue, something like that, and repeated exactly on the top. Then I'd have an assistant blow a bubble, and this was before autofocus. And the depth of field was a very narrow window, and the longevity of a bubble is about a nanosecond. But what's interesting is just before the bubble breaks, you get all this diffraction going on the edges, and you get all these curvy things and going on. So I made a really wonderful series of the bubble. It reminded me almost of 2001 type images. In fact, if Kubrick had seen it, I think he'd probably want to do the same thing a little bit for his slit scan scene. But I have the bubbles alone, and on a few frames, part of the light box showed. In this case, the blue and red layers that were reflecting. And it wasn't really my original intention to include that in the picture, but when I see a good lucky accident like that, I definitely incorporated it in this image, and I think everything comes working well together.
Oh yeah, it works great with the yellow against the blue there at the bottom.
And with the Photoshop technology and selective colors, you can now go in, and I can find colors that we just couldn't get before in a dye transfer. It's just amazing. Selective color alone is an amazing tool. I was tired of seeing models with the studios in their eyes, with umbrellas reflecting back in, or you could turn the pictures upside down. You could pretty much tell what a guy's studio or a person's studio would look like. And I said, well, why don't we try to beat that reflection problem? And Peggy Moffat, wonderful model, did all of Rudy Gernreit's fashion stuff, and I figured she'd be perfect for it. And we hired her to do this, and what we did is we created a what's now called a soft light, but this was made of pure plexi. It'd be like a 8-foot square plexi. And then I cut a huge black circle, and I stood in the back. I'm hidden behind that black circle, which is pasted onto the plexi. And I could make myself disappear, because this is all before the digital retouching period. So you had to go to great lengths to do things that would be just a second away on the computer, but it was fun, and it's called Reflections. I always wondered what would happen if you opened something up and you saw a human eye looking out at you, or an eye, for that matter of fact, any type of eye, right? My wife, Wren, had gotten a whole collection of eyes for me to photograph. I just wanted to do it anyway. And I picked one that I really liked, and we put it in different things. We tried it on fruits, vegetables. We tried it on ketchup. But the can, putting it in a can of something seemed to work good. So we opened up a lot of cans of stuff. The best thing that really worked was canned peaches. That really worked because there was a little indentation in the peach where the pit was, and the eyeball just wanted to fit in there. And there was some rotational things going on that we needed to do to fix up and whatnot. But that became Eye to Eye or Canned Funk. It has 2 titles. And what happened to all those eyes, that I'm talking about what I got, was a picture called Soft Room. And this is inverted. It obviously was photographed as a still life one way, but I always wanted to get a feeling of an overview that I wanted to be like if you walked into a room, like a padded room, and I'll have all these eyeballs looking out over you. And I believe that was done with a Zeiss Flectagon lens long ago. But they came out with the first real 20 millimeters. All right, I had been traveling down to Monument Valley, and there's a small town called Caliente, which had a Holiday Inn. And they were just opening, and I noticed this new sign that was up in front of the hotel when I checked in, and it was so fresh and so painted wonderful yellow and orange. And then down the street there were other signs and whatnot, and I said, that'd make a great shot. But it was late. It was, I'd been on the road. The light was not right. But the next day I got out there and hit it. And I like midday light. I like midday light a lot. And because it's got a real good balance to it, and it's sunlight, and I love wide angle photography, so I'm walking around this sign, and it just, everything came together for me with the welcome and the gasoline signs going on through it. I mean, those are all little parts of things, and even a few wires and things which are nice. And I don't like to over sanitize things. I think it's fun to leave things in. I think one of the biggest problems of the computer generation is that they tend to want to over sanitize things because they can, but it doesn't always make a picture better. And I just love this type of color. It has all the main colors that you really like, and it makes a statement. And it's part of my Real Americana type series, which I've always photographed and like to do and still do. Push is a favorite picture. Many people have asked me about it. And I was at a pool on the Gulf Coast, just kind of taking a break, and I looked over, and next to the hotel that I was staying at, by the side of the pool, was this beautiful trash can with a red top and yellow bottom. But the background was kind of, a fire escape or something. It was not interesting, but boy, that thing was. In my mind, I said, gee, why not move that thing maybe over towards the water or something, and, shoot something clean about it. So it was very light, and I just pulled it over to the beach. People kind of looked at me funny, thought I was running away down the beach with their trash can or something. And the first thing was I was way too far away from the water because I had a 20. I was using a 20 millimeter at the time. So I kept moving it closer and closer, and I found a good point where the shape of the top and the shape of the bottom and I could line up the horizon lines. And I did different pictures, and I still have them, where the red top actually cuts up, high into the sky, and then where it lines up with the line of the sand as opposed to the horizon. But ultimately, I ended up with an image where all the lines come together at the horizon, and it's really a very interesting optical sensation that you get. And it's also a wonderful image to print. You can get some wonderful colors on this thing. The real trouble, again, in a picture like this is, where do you stop sanitizing it? Because there were some pretty ugly things in the sand, and I did want to get rid of those. But then you want the indentations and whatnot. And,
sure.
But Push has become a classic, and people really relate to it. How do you feel about Push, George?
Oh, I like it. I like the top of the photograph is like a perfect blue gradient with no distractions. And I like that in juxtaposition to the geometrics of the yellow and the red and the tan color in the sand below. It's no wonder it's a classic.
This is a used car lot, and a lot of people ask me, where did you get all these pristine cars, vintage cars, looking that great? And in fact, it was a used car lot, I think somewhere in Texas. And I just stopped the car because it was just really interesting and good, and it had a good sunset going on behind it, and it seemed like a good juxtaposition of lights and whatnot. But at the time, those cars were not classic cars, but now, as things age, it's very interesting that things get more interesting because there's a time thing goes on. And all of a sudden, it's a vintage car lot.
Sure. No, it is a great shot. It does feel like Texas.
Yeah.
It almost feels like, I love the red fringe there. It almost feels like those should be American flags. It is a great shot. It definitely says.
It's interesting how like that fringe type thing has progressed, and today it gets so gaudy and they'll hang anything, It's amazing, but it's really tasty little
the bear
little
bulbs.
used car lot.
The bear bulbs are great.
Road Song is a classic image and part of my Americana series, and I had been photographing a whole bunch of Chinese artifacts for Time Life books in Kansas City, of all places, in their museum down in the basement. And it was really a tough assignment where just stuffy and boring, and I don't know why I accepted it. Maybe I wanted to go out to Kansas. But anyway, when I was landing at the airport, I saw this white fence that surrounded the airport. And I didn't even understand what a white picket fence would be doing out around an airport, because normally they have chain link fences and whatnot.
Sure.
But they had this fence that went forever, so I said, gee, if I have any time, I should go back there and scope it out. So I got fed up one afternoon, like third day or so, and I said, let's go out there and check out that fence and get some fresh air. So I go out to the fence by the airport. And it's gorgeous, and it's freshly painted, and as you can see, it goes on to infinity. And there's a road right next to it, and I saw cars going up and over a hill. And I said, I got to hang out here, and I had my tripod and whatnot, so I got a good angle, locked down the camera, and I waited. Read a book or something. And all of a sudden, as the light started to change at dusk, I could see that it was getting ready time to shoot, and cars would come up that hill, and then they'd hit the brakes usually, and the back light would go off, two back lights, and it'd be beautiful because you get two little lights. And I just shot a whole series, and it worked out beyond my expectations, and I actually did it right into the sunset also, with an afterglow of red and whatnot, with car headlights coming at me. But after that, a little bit later, was the dust shot and the tail light. And that worked out to be a Wes Montgomery classic called Road Song for an album cover, and is one of my signature photographs.
Very nice.
More recently, I've been very interested in shooting doorways and different shaped doorways, stairways, and colors, particularly in a place south of Puerto Vallarta that I first went to when I was on the film Night of the Iguana years ago. And the colors there are spectacular. And I love a picture like this. It goes from one plane into another, into a third plane. And you have this marvelous transition going on. And at the same place, I'm walking along, and I see these walls, and there's this wonderful glow happening between two walls. And it's, to me, that's the real fun of photography, when you see something you don't expect and you get, a transition and glows and things. And in the next image, it's different, where it's just really all about color. And the next image is about just lollipop color that glows, and there's sort of a concentration of it where I let it go slightly darker on the outside than the inside, and you have this wonderful, almost visual explosion. So it's a different thing, because when you go back to the other picture, you're getting true light, white, blasting, where on the next picture, which is called Parking Wall, you don't really have that highlight to go into, but you do get this blast of central bright color.
It's a real hot spot.
Yeah, it is a hot spot. And then maybe in conclusion of that particular series that I've done in Mexico is Sky Whirl, which to me is really a wonderful image, because as you look at it, it's almost like another planet, a water planet or something that you're looking at. It's an optical illusion. You're looking upwards, and it's the cloud just makes it work for me, and it looks like a water world or something. It's another planet. It's like science fiction photography.
Yeah, the blue against the yellows. I think this is my favorite out of the series.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, George.
Well, this is the one that caught my eye, that caused me to call you up and ask you to shoot some demo images for us in Mexico.
Well, that's true, and that was a fun assignment. It really was. And, well, at this point, I think we can call it a day. I mean, the current book I'm working on, I've finished, is The Color of Jazz.
Just published?
Yes, it came out a few months ago, and it's a lot of fun, and it has, like, a lot of these pictures are in it. And I was lucky to get Quincy Jones to write the introduction, and it's a good way to use my eyeball picture.
There you go. Nice way to end the series.
Yeah. So here's looking at you, George.
Thanks, Pete. Thank you so much, Pete. Really appreciate you sitting down and showing us some pictures and telling us about your vision.
My pleasure.
Your career.
My pleasure.
Thanks.